This is an opportunity for me to trust you. So upstairs, get your book, come back down. I'm noticing the time that you're leaving right now, okay? Okay. She lived in Madison. She loved poetry. She wrote short stories. She dreamed of being a teacher. How did Mildred Fish Harnack end up being a spy during World War II? Simply put, it was the right thing to do. Childhood and education. Mildred Fish Harnack's story begins in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was born in 1902 among Milwaukee's large population of German immigrants. As a young girl, Mildred learned how to read, write, speak both German and English. In 1919, Mildred's family moved to Washington, D.C. But in 1921, Mildred returned to Wisconsin to attend the university in Madison. She studied English literature. Mildred loved to write her own stories and poems. Soon her work was being published in the Wisconsin Literary Magazine. Mildred became an assistant editor for the magazine. She still published her own stories and poetry. Mildred graduated from college in 1925. She went back the next year to get her master's degree. In 1926, she met her future husband, Arvid Harnack. Arvid was a German. He was teaching economics in the United States. Arvid and Mildred fell in love and were married in 1928. Arvid moved back to Germany. In 1929, Mildred followed him there. By 1930, they had settled in New Berlin. Germany and the rise of the Nazi Party. Why did Mildred and Arvid move to Germany? Part of the reason may have been the Great Depression. The American stock market crashed in 1929. Countries all over the world began to have serious problems. People who had invested their life savings in the stock market lost everything. They couldn't pay back loans from banks. Banks couldn't get any money to pay people who had their savings inside. Soon, companies were cutting workers because no one had money to buy anything. Banks shut their door as runs happened again and again. It was a terrible crisis, and there were no jobs and little hope. Things were hard in Germany, too. Germans were also suffering from a depression. It had started soon after World War I ended in 1918. The German government had to pay huge sums of money to the countries they invaded in the war. This bankrupted the country. The German people were desperate to solve their problems. It was around this time that Adolf Hitler, the National Socialist, began their rise to power. They were known as the Nazi Party. By 1933, the Nazis had taken control of Germany. They used their political power to attack their enemies. The attacks, known as purges, became worse and worse. Eventually, the purges led to the Holocaust. The Holocaust was the Nazis' attempt to murder all of the Jewish people in Germany and beyond. The Nazis blamed Jews for everything bad that had happened in Germany since the Great War. The Nazis convinced the German people to go along with their plan for another war. World War II claimed millions of lives, including over 6 million Jewish men, women, children, and they were murdered at death camps. Death camps were places the Nazis created to enslave and kill people as fast as possible. Becoming spies. Mildred and Arvid were not Nazis. They worked and studied at the University of Berlin. They translated poetry and literature and studied other countries and the way of life. They toured the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union practiced a form of politics called communism. In communism, all work is done for the state. The state is in charge of equally sharing everything that comes from the work. Mildred and Arvid felt that communism could save the world from poverty and hunger. The Harnacks were popular in Germany and had many friends. In 1937, Mildred and Arvid started inviting friends to their home to talk about politics and other subjects. This was dangerous in Nazi Germany. People were arrested for saying anything bad about the government. Soon, Germany and the Soviet Union were at war. Mildred and Arvid and their friends decided to do something to stop the Nazis. Britain was fighting the Nazis in Africa, and the United States was staying out of the war. Mildred, Arvid, and their friends made the decision to help the Soviet Union. The Red Orchestra. Their group of friends became known as the Red Orchestra. This was because they named their secret radio transmitters after musical instruments. Between 1940 and 1942, the Red Orchestra was responsible for helping the Soviet Union in many ways. They transmitted messages to Soviet fighters. They reported on the strength of Germany's air force. They even knew how many fighter planes Germany could make each month. They warned of Nazi attacks and reported about how much fuel German armies had. They found out how many chemical weapons Germany had and where they stored them. All the information helped the Russians survive long enough to defeat the Nazis. In August 1942, the Nazis captured the Soviet spy. The spy told the Germans all about the Red Orchestra. Soon, the radios were found. Mildred and Arvid and 116 other people were arrested. Trial and execution. Arvid and Mildred were put on trial in December 1942. They were found guilty of espionage. the use of spies by a government to discover the military and political secrets of other nations. Arvid was sentenced to death and he was hanged on Christmas Eve. At first, Mildred was sentenced to 4 years at a prison camp, but Adolf Hitler wanted to make an example out of her. He ordered the court to change Mildred's sentence to death. On January 16, 1943, the judges did what he asked. Mildred Fish Harnack spent her last month in prison doing what she loved, reading and translating works of poetry. She was executed on February 16, 1943. Her last words were, "And I have loved Germany so much." Mildred Fish Harnack is celebrated in Wisconsin on September 16th. She was an amazing woman who died a hero to many people whose lives she saved.